Air-cooled engines, oil-cooled engines, and liquid-cooled engines. You've probably come across these terms before. As the names imply, these represent different approaches to engine cooling systems. In this video, we'll break down how each of these cooling methods functions, what sets them apart, and look at their respective pros and cons. We know that when an engine operates, it produces heat alongside mechanical output. On average, only around 30% of the fuel's energy actually gets converted into mechanical work. The rest is lost as heat. If this heat isn't managed properly, engine components can melt down and the engine will lock up. That's why cooling is essential, and the simplest, most affordable method is using air. To grasp how air cooling works, we first need to understand the fundamentals of heat transfer. Whenever a hot surface meets cooler air, heat naturally moves from that surface into the air. This is known as convection, the transfer of heat from a solid surface into a surrounding fluid, air in this case. The bigger the temperature gap between the surface and the air, the quicker heat moves, and the larger the surface area, the more heat gets transferred. Put simply, to cool something down fast, you need to expand its surface area. Picture a flat metal sheet. Air only flows across its top, but add 10 to 15 fins to it, and now that same airflow passes through each individual fin. This same idea is applied to engines. On an air-cooled engine cylinder block, you'll find numerous thin metal plates or ridges known as cooling fins. These multiply the engine's effective surface area significantly. More surface area means more air passing through the fins, which means engine heat escapes faster. This makes for a very simple and low-cost cooling setup. However, air cooling does have drawbacks. It performs best when outside temperatures are low and airflow is strong. While riding on a highway, constant high-speed air moves across the fins and keeps the engine cool efficiently. But sitting in traffic during hot weather means fresh air can't reach the fins properly, so cooling suffers. This inconsistency in temperature directly impacts combustion efficiency, fuel economy, and how long the engine lasts. That's why bigger, high-performance engines can't depend solely on air. Air can cool the engine's exterior, but internal components like pistons and valves are out of reach for outside air. To cool these hidden hot spots, we use something already circulating inside the engine oil. This brings us to oil-cooled engines. Normally, engine oil's job is lubrication, keeping friction to a minimum. But oil has a second function, absorbing heat from internal engine components. Now, oil is also present in air-cooled engines. So what makes this different? In oil-cooled setups, there's an extra part added in oil cooler. It resembles a small radiator, usually positioned at the front of the engine. As oil contacts hot engine parts, it picks up heat through conduction. So the oil serves double duty here, handling both lubrication and heat transport. This heated oil then exits the engine and travels to the oil cooler. As the bike moves, air passes through the cooler and brings the oil's temperature down. The cooled oil then returns to the engine. Thanks to the engine oil, we've addressed cooling for internal components. But one issue persists. Like air-cooled systems, oil-cooled engines still rely on outside airflow to cool the oil cooler. If the bike isn't moving, no air passes through the cooler and the oil stays hot. So, to keep the engine within a precise temperature range, regardless of traffic or highway conditions, we need an actively managed cooling system, which is exactly what liquid cooling provides. Technically speaking, oil is a liquid too, but its ability to absorb heat, its specific heat capacity, is lower than water's. Simply put, the same amount of water can soak up more heat than oil can. Older vehicles used plain water for cooling, which needed frequent refilling in the radiator. This was because cooling systems back then were typically unsealed and unpressurized, meaning the radiator's internal pressure matched atmospheric pressure. And there's a basic scientific fact. At normal pressure, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. So as those engines heated up, the water would hit its boiling point, turn to steam, and escape through an overflow pipe. This caused the radiator's water level to keep dropping, requiring constant refills. And boiling wasn't the only issue. Plain water also brought risks of rust, corrosion, and freezing in cold conditions. To fix this, cooling systems were redesigned to be sealed and pressurized, and coolant replaced plain water, a carefully balanced mix of water and chemicals that resist corrosion and prevent freezing. You've likely noticed pressure ratings printed on modern radiator caps, indicating the system is pressurized. Inside that cap sits a spring-loaded pressure valve that maintains roughly 1 to 1.5 bars of pressure within the system. As pressure rises, so does the liquid's boiling point. That's why coolant in a pressurized system can stay liquid even past 120 degrees Celsius. Now, let's look at how coolant actually does its job. Hollow channels are built around the cylinder block and cylinder head. These are called coolant jackets. As the engine runs, intense heat builds up in the combustion chamber and travels to the cylinder walls via conduction. The coolant flowing around these walls soaks up that heat. A water pump keeps the coolant moving continuously. The heated coolant exits the engine and heads to the radiator, which contains many slim tubes and fins. As coolant passes through these tubes, heat moves from the coolant into the tubes, then into the fins, and finally out into the air via convection. If the bike is in motion, natural airflow handles the cooling. If it's stuck in traffic, a radiator fan kicks in to continuously push air through the radiator. There's another clever detail to this system. If coolant started flowing to the radiator right from a cold start, the engine would take much longer to reach operating temperature. That's where the thermostat comes in. While the engine is cold, the thermostat stays shut, blocking coolant from reaching the radiator so the engine warms up faster. Once it hits optimal temperature, the thermostat opens and coolant begins circulating through the radiator. This means liquid cooling doesn't just remove heat, it also keeps the engine operating within a tightly controlled temperature range. Whether you're crawling through traffic or cruising on the highway, to wrap up, comparing all three systems, air cooling is the most basic, no pump, no radiator, no coolant needed. It's lightweight, cheap, and low maintenance, but entirely dependent on airflow, causing temperature swings in traffic. That's why it's mainly found in commuter bikes and lower compression engines. Oil cooling sits in the middle, more effective than air cooling since oil can reach internal hotspots, but it still needs airflow and has limited heat-carrying capacity. Finally, liquid cooling is the most consistent and controlled option, making it the go-to choice for high-performance, high-compression engines. That wraps up this video. Feel free to share your thoughts or suggestions in the comments below. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching.